You're listening to Fish Out of Water, the podcast where feeling out of place becomes the start of something new. Dive in with us. Let's explore stories, insights, and real conversations that help you swim forward with purpose. Well, we're here. We finally got there. Episode 1. We loved the opportunity to share a little bit more of our story and our context last week in just the idea of how Lisa and I met. And I think that the most dynamic part of our relationship is the balance that we've been able to develop over the years. And so I think that regardless of whose voice is going to be heard, Lisa and I are diving into this context in a unique level of balance that Lisa's been able to speak so powerfully into how I've crafted my voice and my identity. And so I'm excited about no longer fitting into a mold of just who I was or who I thought I wanted to be. And Lisa, why don't you just kind of open up a little bit about kind of what does it mean to be a fish out of water for you?
Fish out of water is not where it thinks it's supposed to be, right? At the end of the day, it's in a very uncomfortable position. You know, uh, we live in a world where people constantly put us into buckets, containers, boxes, situations, whatever it is that you want to describe it as, where we feel very uncomfortable, where we feel cornered, where we feel not equipped to deal with whatever's happening. And uh, I think it's a natural thing where we start to try and be someone who we're not in those situations. And one of the things you and I have talked about this so often is that we're not supposed to be someone else. We're supposed to be who we are. And we have to learn, um, come to a place basically where we recognize our strengths and we learn to operate in those naturally. And not that, you don't work out of places of weakness or things that you're not comfortable with, but in understanding your strengths, it actually empowers you in those situations to connect with others to get them to come in this situation, help, or even, put yourself in somewhat of a vulnerable position that may have results that you might not expect, in that it draws other people in when they see your vulnerability. Yeah, I think I could go on and on about that, because it's something that we have talked about so often, but um, at the end of the day, it can be very controversial, wouldn't you think? Because I've talked about this with other people and they're like, I don't know about that.
Absolutely. I think that the idea of the controversy that you're mentioning, and I talked briefly about Brene Brown's comment in regards to what is the opposite of belonging. And we think immediately it's isolation. But she opens up this whole Pandora's box of it not just being isolation, but it's the process of us trying to fit in. It's
Hmm.
us trying to become what we think others want us to be, which is then reducing ourselves to something else. And and I think that the idea of acknowledging how we are wired in our thoughts, in our experiences, in how we are approaching life is this new table conversation that has to be had.
Hmm.
This is the way in which we learn how to build connectivity. That I love the joke that we created in that, as a fish out of water, we're looking for our new school.
Yeah.
And that the I but at the same time, I want to make sure that we're always being cautious about tribalism. I think that the idea of tribalism is essentially creating an echo chamber. And I mean, that happens so easily within social media. It happens so easily in the doom scrolling when you're trying to find something, but all of a sudden, all you're getting is agreement because the way in which the algorithm is driving our connection to the people around us. And so I guess we start off with the question of, do we even feel different than others today?
I think I hesitate to answer that question because you briefly touched on it a second ago, is that we put our identity so much in what we think others think of us or think that we should be. And that comes to the point of image. You know,
Mm.
we place image over identity. And it's a dangerous place to be because if your image doesn't match your true, authentic identity, your true self, then you're constantly striving for this personality, if you will, that's really not you, that you
Mm.
have to put effort into every day, every moment to exude that that personality, as opposed to walking with ease at just being who you are. Does that make sense what I'm like, in terms of what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. It's like that's tapping into the sweet spot of where we're trying to not necessarily separate ourselves from the pack for the sake thereof, but the idea of sharing in and inviting people to the difficult conversations, either because we don't know how to have them, we don't have any experience in having them, and we don't even know how to celebrate the differences between one another.
Mm-hmm.
We're constantly trying to find sameness
Yeah.
rather than uniqueness.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just when you mentioned, we need to be careful of tribalism, is that, we have a tendency of like surrounding ourselves with like people, like-minded, the same way of thinking, and it becomes this place of uh, exclusivity,
Mm.
where it's not okay to think differently. And whenever you get into a situation like that, is that it becomes a very dangerous incestuous place in terms of thought, because now you have a bunch of yes people around you as opposed to people who are going to challenge you and your way of thinking to bring you to a higher place. That's not to say they're right or they're wrong or you're wrong. It's a matter of having that discourse back and forth of finding that new level where whether it's compromise, whether it's finding what's the right and what's the wrong. But the point is that you're working together to lift yourselves up, um, because it's not supposed to be a power struggle. It's supposed to be about community and bringing the village along with you, or you going along with the village, however you want to word that.
Mm.
It's about being a collective, um, for the betterment of everyone involved. And, when we talk about identity over image, there's I think an aspect that we haven't talked about very well about yet, is that your core temperament is something that's so crucial to understand about yourself. Um, you're an expert in this area, so I don't even want to go into it. I want to push the ball back into your court on this one. Can you share, when we talk about core temperament, what are the immediate takeaways that people should have?
I think that one of the first aspects when we just start discussing temperament, psychology, mental acuity, we so often forget the impact of the autonomic behavior within our psychology. And so that the idea of understanding a temperament is the same way as understanding breathing. That you don't sit and think, oh yeah, I forgot to breathe that minute. I have to take a breath. That your your environment, your upbringing, your friendships, the parenting that you've experienced, the good, the bad, the ugly of life that has molded you essentially are all bleeding into those autonomic processes that we are forever and always looking to solve for two core issues. We are looking for safety and we are looking for security.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is why we are driven towards tribalism, because we want safety, we want sameness, because in sameness there's no requirement for me to change and there's really no requirement for anybody else to change.
Mm-hmm.
But then we become complacent and comfortable. And we, I think, intuitively know that when growth is not happening, that we're not comfortable, really, even though it may appear that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of understanding temperament is the journey into how am I building community around me? How am I developing conversations? How am I hearing others and how are others hearing me? And
Mm-hmm.
so the first step really starts with ourselves. We
Mm-hmm.
need to get to a place where I can articulate with as big as necessary language or as small. It doesn't have to be fancy, but we
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to articulate, I am dot dot dot. This is the fuel that I need. This is the way that I lead. This is the way that I inhabit the space that I'm coming into. And I think that when we think about empowerment and we think about the Empower You process, the journey into the self is sometimes the scariest part. But
Mm-hmm.
we'll push that scariness to the, well, other people or that situation, or if I have to move, or we push the fear of the self out into all of these other spaces, so we're never really confronting it.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about temperament, we're talking about the confrontation of, and to use another term, the shadow self, the
Mm-hmm.
space that is driving the behavior that you don't even recognize
Mm-hmm.
is really coming to that first step.
Do you think that people shy away from this journey of self-discovery, just to put it in simple terms, um, because of negative, experiences in the past, whether it's trauma or, well, usually it would be trauma, but what is it that you think that drives people away from this discovery of inner self? I mean, because to you and I, being on this journey, we're excited to learn more about what our autonomic responses are, in everyday situations, because it helps us to know ourselves. And even in
Mhm.
sharing with each other, you and I know we basically can predict how the other is going to react in most given circumstances. But for someone who hasn't started that journey yet, what could be some of the things holding them back?
I think the biggest thing is the safety and security component, that there's not an assurance that by taking this step, I become more safe. I become more secure. In fact, by taking the first step, you actually have to dismantle the systems of our life that
Hmm.
we've used to create that safety and security,
Hmm.
because we don't understand how these outside influences are impacting us.
Hmm.
And and there is not a system in westernized culture
Hmm.
that encourages this transformation. If you look into Europe and the Middle East and kind of over into that kind of the eastern side of culture and society, they do this throughout their teenage years.
Hmm.
This is not an uncommon approach to dismantle the childlikeness, and that's when we get into psychology, the autonomic system is the child version of yourself.
Okay.
Can you imagine being in your mid 30s, late 20s, and there are times when you're still behaving like a child and and you don't understand why things aren't working out in your favor.
Hmm.
But we've not addressed the core concern
Hmm.
of what does it mean to mature? And maturing is not I'm trying, like, I want to be careful because I just want to be careful. I don't even have the language just yet, but we don't, we're not asking people to be confrontational with themselves. I'm almost asking for this reflexive spirituality or contemplative or the idea of just sitting with yourself,
Hmm.
not to change yourself,
Hmm.
but to understand
Hmm.
the path. And the autonomic system doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be understood.
Yeah. And I think that last place where you're going of, you don't need to be fixed and we're not asking you to expose yourself. I think it's important, to put forward the caveat that coaching is not therapy. So, if there are things in your past that are traumatic or hurtful or, have created this place of insecurity and um, lack of safety and well-being, if you will, um, that's something that therapists would deal with. We would more, as coaches, um, we would more look at, okay, this is where you are today. What's one small step that we
Mm,
can work with you on to start to make the transition to healthier ways of thinking, healthier ways of seeing yourself, healthier ways of seeing the world around you? I mean, I remember when I started really thinking about starting Empower You. And one of the slogans, if you will, that I had I was like hardcore on is like taking you from the can't to the can. And our website, it's more like taking you from the can't to the watch me do this. And that's the idea of coaching that, uh, coaching is about taking these small steps
mm,
that take you from this mentality of, I can't do this, it's not possible, blah, 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 blah. I don't even need to fill in you can fill in the blanks there to this place of, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to do what it takes to figure this out. And if it's not possible, there's going to be other reasons outside of myself that maybe I need to bring in somebody else to help me to get to that place. But the
mm,
point is that if you want to go from A to B, there's a way to get to B. You just got to figure it out.
mhm,
And so, for those people who might have that fear of exposing themselves, it's not what coaching is about. You
mm,
as someone, receiving the coaching, you get to determine what you want to share and what you don't want to share. And um, your coach is not there to find out the dirty grit of anyone's life. You know, as a coach, I've sat with a few people who've had some really hard paths. And because I genuinely care about my clients, it's really hard to sit and listen to some of it.
mm,
And not being a therapist, I can't help them deal with some of that trauma. What I can do is help them to move forward despite the trauma.
mm,
And so sitting in that place and seeing somebody come out of that shell and share who they are and what their experience are is a total privilege on my end, is the way that I see it. And uh, some of the freedom that some of them have really experienced in being willing to put themselves into a vulnerable space of sharing with me, the results they've seen have been tremendous.
mm.
Um, so I just wanted to put that out there because I don't want people to think that, we'll do therapy or they're going to be exposed or whatever. That's not what this is about. This is about whatever you're willing to share or whatever you're willing to go after. That's the point. Um, so yeah, let me sign off on that one.
I love how you put all that together because I've developed a phrase and it's I'm not worried about why, I'm only worried about what's next. That you will need
Yeah,
to manage your why. There's no doubt about it.
yeah.
Why did this happen to me? Why did I let this? You'll have to journey through a grieving process. And I think that as a community,
Hmm.
in and through Empowered You, one of our goals is to make sure that people have access to the right professionals
Mm-hmm.
that can be associated to manage a lot of that more therapeutic style of care.
Yeah.
That in that partnership, and of course it would all be completely confidential. It isn't about sharing notes with one another. It's about having access to the right tools and the right people in the midst of this whole thing. And that the the people that we're partnering with will then go, oh, it's all the same language. Now I get what Lisa's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Now I get what Brett's trying to get me to work in. And that this community approach, which is where our group stuff starts. This is the cohort. This is the heart of the cohort at the very base, is that we're looking to create a space where there's a multitude of voices
Mm-hmm.
speaking into each unique individualized component moving out and moving forward into the what's next.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the two tools that we want to highlight in these first couple of episodes is one is our relational inventory, that we're looking at how do we build deeper and more authentic relationships with one another.
Mm-hmm.
How do we understand what is the fuel that I need and
Mm-hmm.
what is the fuel that I offer to the people that are in my sphere, in my circle?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we look at that first relational inventory, we're looking at empowering words.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be externally verbalizing how excited we are about people, their process, their journey, their thoughts? We think about the idea of supportive action, and what does it look like when we are genuinely coming alongside the people that we're partnering with, the
Mm-hmm.
people that are in our community. What
Mm-hmm.
does it look like to anticipate their needs and what is coming and happening in and around them? We think of meaningful tokens, the idea that there are individuals who think about others when they're not together.
Mm-hmm.
When I don't have the sustained reminder of who you are, but I'm thinking about you, or something reminds me of you, and the idea of what does it look like to reveal that memory, that moment. And a lot of times it can be flowers for your wife. My kids, we have a running gag in our family. I have, for most of my adult life, had tremendously horrible bad breath. So we have this running gag joke, and my kids will come home from Walmart and they'll put a pack of gum on my desk, or they'll put a package of Tic Tacs. Tic Tacs are one of my favorites. And so they'll have that. And it was like, oh, they were thinking about me when I wasn't present. That's that meaningful token.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which we intentionally shift our activity and focus and desire to in invest in someone's life. How am I measuring time? And when I can suspend time for myself for another person. And then lastly is this grounded connection, this way in which we physically engage with one another, high fives, hugs, just kind of leaning into and making that physical contact with another human being. These are essentially the five, and there's variations and there's supportive processes that exist in each of these that really drive home the necessary fuel in how do we find the energy
Mm-hmm.
to then take the deeper dive into ourselves.
Right.
And there are hundreds of different assessments out there. What we've done is we've kind of pulled back, looked at kind of our life, our journey, we call it a glossary of terms. What are we saying when we say this? What do we mean when we use that word? And as
Mm-hmm.
we've defined that, we've taken a deeper look at some of the very traditional assessments to surface this commonality
Mm-hmm.
that people are experiencing across the board.
Hmm.
How do we meet them in that space is kind of like that first component that we
Hmm.
love to touch on.
So I guess to sum up everything that we've been talking about today, and even with that last component of the relational aspects that we have with people, um, we need to learn to stop performing and really
Hmm.
to show up in an authentic way, just by being our natural selves. And so with that, we're gonna cut it off here. And there's still so much I want to talk about. Just to be honest, we could go on and on. But we want to thank you for joining us today on Fish Out of Water podcast with Bret and Lisa from Empower You. And we wish you guys an awesome day.
And we look forward to our next episode. We're going to dive deeper into that temperament conversation. And
Yes.
what does it look like to be driven into who you are?
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.